The video of Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke shooting Laquan McDonald 16 times was enough for prosecutors to charge him with first-degree murder.
On November 20th, 2014, Laquan McDonald was murdered by a Chicago police officer. On November 24th, 2015, dashcam footage of the shooting was finally released to the public after being held back until after elections had ended. The city erupted. 2 weeks later, Mayor Rahm Emanuel stepped in front of City Council and spoke in an attempt to salvage his career and his reputation.
The problem is other times referred to as the code of silence. It is this tendency to ignore. It is a tendency to deny. It is a tendency, in some cases, to cover up the bad actions of a colleague or colleagues.
By calling out what everyone already knew was happening in the ranks of the Chicago police, Emanuel had given himself a reprieve. He would further show his contrition by firing the superintendent of police and establishing a task force on police accountability. But the situation left many people asking, what good is accountability if you only demonstrate it after you're caught? Story after story have come out that prove that the code of silence pervades every facet of Chicago administration. Look closely in any given corner, and you'll find bad actors operating out of their own self-interest and turning a blind eye to corruption and evil. In June 2018, the Chicago Tribune released an earth-shattering expose on uninvestigated sexual abuse of children within the Chicago public school system. Once again, the mayor, school officials, and city aldermen fell over themselves to apologize profusely. One alderman, Edward Burke, took the initiative in establishing a hotline for concerned parents to call. Examine Alderman Burke's past more closely, and it's immediately apparent that he's been happy to sit on the threat of abuse, just so long as it wasn't splashed across the front page of national newspapers. It was Burke, as chair of the Committee on Finance, who pushed to have the city's contracts for the transportation of deceased bodies rebid back in 2009. In 2011, the city would select a company named Allied Services Group to take over deceased body removal. Allied Services Group is owned by John Stamps and was formerly known as Stamps Construction, a company with zero experience in the removal of deceased bodies. In order to win the city's contract, its proposal touted its acquisition of a different company, Allied Cleaning Services, which had Illinois licensure for the removal of deceased bodies. Just one problem with that. Allied Cleaning was operated by a man named John W. Klazak, who had once had his own turn in the spotlight. The former fire chief in Thornton, Klazak was convicted in 2005 of sexual abuse against two boys who had been cadets in the city's fire career program while he had been chief. But in Chicago's culture of corruption, 2005 was eons ago. The city's hiring of a firm run by a convicted child sex offender was, to borrow Mayor Emanuel's words, ignored, denied, and covered up. Any complaints went unacknowledged and unpublicized. And the city knows that Klazak is working in its employ, behind the front of Allied Services Group. Here's a letter from Jamie Rhee, at the time procurement officer, addressed directly to Klazak as a representative of Allied, letting him know that the city would be renewing Allied's contract. Klazak isn't alone when it comes to dubious business people tied to the city's hiring of Allied Services Group, either. In order to get a better score on its initial application, Allied brought in other small firms that it thought would help it with obtaining minority-owned and women-owned business certification. One firm was run by Patricia Doherty, a felon with wire fraud, counterfeiting, and identity theft charges. Another firm was owned by Althea Taylor, who would later be charged with fraud by the state attorney's office for claiming she could deliver city grants to nonprofit organizations, which she was unable to.
Did she get you the money you needed?
No, she ripped us off.
I'd like to see the documentation on that.
Well, if people like to see the color of my hair, they don't have a good day.
As for Alderman Burke, he's currently facing his own bevy of allegations, from the FBI raiding his offices in early January under accusations of extortion caught on wiretap, to the former Chicago Aviation Commissioner Ginger Evans accusing him of having meddled in contracts at O'Hare. According to Mayor Emanuel, if Commissioner Evans had concerns over Burke's undue influence at O'Hare, she should have spoken up. But does Emanuel hold himself to that same standard? After all, he's the one who promoted Jamie Rhee, who originally oversaw the hiring of Klezak, to run the airport after Evans was deposed. As for the city, it continues on as if nothing happened. Despite Emanuel's impassioned speech on the dais 4 years ago, his hand-picked replacement for police superintendent maintains that there is no such thing as a code of silence.
Was it ever brought to your attention that there may have been a code of silence in the CPD while you were the chief of the Bureau of Patrol?
No. No.
Would you keep Eddie Johnson and Janice Jackson?
I've publicly said that I would not keep Superintendent Johnson.
Why not?
I think that we need stronger leadership in the police department, and I'm concerned that he testified in court that there was no such thing as a code of silence in the police department.
As for the current mayor, he's wisely chosen to flee the sinking ship and to not seek re-election.
Amy and I have decided it's time to write another chapter together.
But recently released emails show that he is still carefully cultivating his legacy, always on the lookout for the next political opportunity to seize on.
Never allow a good crisis to go to waste. It's the opportunity to do the big things you never thought possible and make them possible.
Well, Rahm, this is a crisis, all right. What did you know? When did you know it? And what did you do about it? When does refusing to oversee the police department turn into the protection of murderers? When does ignoring citizen concerns about city-employed sex offenders turn into the protection of sexual predators? What about the children, Rahm?